So after a break from Qatar, it was on to the final triple header of the 2023 season, as everyone headed stateside and to Austin, specifically to the Circuit of the Americas for this year's US Grand Prix, a track with a surface that's so awful, it's being renamed the Chicago Bears. Coming into the weekend, and with Verstappen and Red Bull having both championships wrapped up, attention turned to second, with Sergio Perez trying to hold off Lewis Hamilton and show the F1 world that he was actually a decent driver, given that recent results, well, kinda speak otherwise. Further back, and Aston Martin were clinging on to 4th place with McLaren just 11 points behind, helped out by the older of their two child drivers now having the longest active podium streak on the grid, and by Lance Stroll being quite literally a more effective street fighter than an actual F1 driver. Hey guys, it's Taron and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 18 of the 2023 F1 season. Now before we get going, as always, just a quick little reminder that if you do end up enjoying the video, to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content on the channel. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2023 US Grand Prix. So, with a weekend off, the F1 world decided to chuck a couple of juicy storylines our way. First off was ex-F1 boss Bernie Ecclestone in the news as he was given a suspended jail sentence for fraud. Then again, I'm not surprised, F1 has historically been full of frauds, typically pretending to be racing drivers. Next up, we had the news that the FIA would reopen their investigation into Lewis Hamilton crossing the track in Qatar, as after he spent pretty much his whole race sabotaging the entire Mercedes team, he was stranded in the gravel, walking back across the live track to get back to the pit lane. However, the controversial aspect comes from part of the FIA's reasoning, which was because of his role model status, which is kinda like saying, because you're famous, we need to be more harsh. I'd say I'm surprised, but the FIA doing something that makes sense, well, that's less likely than a good performance from Checo. Speaking of which, there was rumour all week long of an ultimatum where if Sergio lost P2 in the standings, he'd be dropped by Red Bull, with Hamilton currently in P3 and catching the Mexican. Can't possibly think of any motivation he might have for wanting to jump ahead. And finally, we had the confirmation that Daniel Ricciardo would be returning to the grid for the second time this year, as Liam Lawson's cameo in the AlphaTauri was over with the young New Zealander having to take a back seat from Cota onwards. Better get used to it, Liam, you are a Red Bull driver after all. Into the action, and given the sprint weekend format, there was only one practice session, FP1, with Carlos Sainz having to decide if he wanted to crash into Norris or abandon his lap, the Spaniard choosing the latter. Should have pulled a Bottas just for the bants, really. Over at Aston Martin, and Lance Stroll was having to box early given brake issues with his car. Must be nice for the team being able to blame something other than the driver for a change. At McLaren, and Oscar Piastri was trying his hand at becoming a rally driver, doing some off-roading at turn 9 and nearly chucking his McLaren into the wall in the process. And then finally, to round out practice, it was everyone's favourite Japanese hit single, Traffic Paradise, with Tsunoda coming across a host of cars as he attempted to make his way to the final corner. Into some early qualifying then, and after the first runs, it was Verstappen leading the top 3, if you count backwards that is, with the unlikely duo of Hülkenberg and Ocon sitting atop the times. Hülkenberg looking confused as to what the top 3 in Formula 1 actually is.
What is this place?
Sadly for Nico, that became evidently clear as in the space of a few minutes he went into full Haas mode and was eliminated from qualifying. And then over at Aston Martin, with a new upgrade on the car, the drivers and the team were eager to showcase their new pace. Into Q2, and as per usual, Lando Norris was not caring about track limits, going wide at the second to last corner and having his lap time deleted, leaving him last after one lap, with Lando blaming the car ahead of him for putting him off. Yes, because F1 drivers never have to deal with other cars on the same bit of track. Ever. Over at Red Bull, and Sergio Perez was doing what he does best and looking like he might be out in Q2, sitting on the bubble and fortunate enough to have no improvements from those beneath him, squeaking through in 10th by just 18,000th, a gap so small you can fit the entirety of Yuki Tsunoda in it. Into Q3, and it was Charles Leclerc on provisional pole in his Ferrari with Lewis Hamilton in second, Verstappen in third having put in a time 2.5 tenths back from P1. Didn't stop him losing his mind though over Perez being in his vicinity at the final corner. Onto the final runs, and pole merchant Leclerc improved his time by just over 1/10 of a second, with Verstappen setting his time 30 seconds later and getting P1 by 5 thousandths. But
hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
As turn 19 was the undoing of Max, track limits getting his lap deleted and relegating the Dutchman down to 6th, with 2nd to 5th headlined by Lando Norris, with Hamilton, Sainz and Russell in behind. Into the first part of the sprint shootout, and if there's one thing that's always guaranteed, it's Logan Sargent being last. Meanwhile, at Mercedes, and George Russell was busy pretending to be blind as he got in Leclerc's way. A penalty that's such a slam dunk, I think Victor Wembanyama would be proud of that one. I guess at least George wasn't driving into other cars like his teammate Lewis Hamilton with Yuki Tsunoda. Into the second part of the shootout, and Max Verstappen was causing the drama, going full Nikita Mazepin out of turn 9 and doing a 360 before ending up facing in the right direction. Still getting through though, like all the top 4 teams, with Gasly and Albon sneaking through. Onto the final session now, and Max Verstappen set the benchmark, with both McLarens trying to beat him, but Norris falling 1/10 short, and both Mercedes giving it a go, but again Hamilton being 700ths off, and then Ferrari trying their best with Leclerc half a tenth away, but Verstappen maintaining P1. Oh, and Sergio Perez did also give it a go, but he was so far away he may as well have been back in the hotel. So onto the sprint now, and we were treated to some prime Max Verstappen at the start. By that I mean forcing Leclerc to the inside and off the track, up toward turn 1, with the Ferrari getting a bad exit from the first turn, opening the door for Lewis Hamilton, going round the outside of Charles and then up into second place. When I say round the outside, I do mean outside the track, going all 4 wheels off. Not that the stewards cared.
But I cannot see, I'm legally blind.
In behind, and Carlos Sainz on softs decided to put his good start to use, driving into Oscar Piastri as he cut across the McLaren, damaging the Australian's front wing, leading to what became a pretty miserable afternoon for Oscar Piastri, as Sergio Perez was pretty quickly by with the switchback coming off the back straight up into 6th. But for Oscar, sadly the fall wasn't over, as a couple of corners later George Russell did the Mercedes special and went by round the outside, copying his teammates' moves and making the pass off the track, but this time was penalised with a 5-second penalty. And while Russell was getting that news, Oscar Piastri was still being overtaken, as Pierre Gasly sent it up into turn 1 late on the brakes and first to the apex to overtake the McLaren. Further up the road, and after a good start on soft tyres for Sainz, well, they were pretty much dead, as after a few laps defence, Lando Norris was by into 4th with Perez by on the next lap as well. A few laps later, it was the turn of George Russell to try and get past the Ferrari, with George diving up the inside of turn 1, but unlike last year, decided not to punt Sainz out of the race. Probably should have though, as Carlos got the switchback to stay ahead. However, up at the front, after fending off a brief challenge from Lewis Hamilton, it was a win for Max Verstappen, with Charles Leclerc in 3rd picking up the final sprint podium position. On to race day then, and with a great start from P2, it was Lando Norris leading the race out of turn 1. In behind, and with a good getaway, Carlos Sainz was taking advantage, squeezing his way up the inside of Lewis Hamilton but taking the position and slotting in behind Leclerc, with the Ferrari pair not done squabbling as they headed along the back straight, with the pair going side by side but Leclerc being the one to come out ahead and keep P2 behind Norris. And just a couple laps later, it was Lewis Hamilton getting involved with the Scuderia, going down the inside of Sainz on the back straight, relegating the Spaniard to the 4th place on lap 4. And then on lap 5, it was down to 5th, as Max went up the inside as well and elevated his Red Bull up the order, keeping himself behind Hamilton. Meanwhile, their teammates were busy ganging up on Pierre Gasly with the Alpine in 7th, with Russell and Perez both using DRS to fly by the Frenchman, with Pierre losing 2 places in just a few moments. Over in the other Alpine, and for Esteban Ocon, well, it was going even worse, as Oscar Piastri decided that he'd inflict even more pain on Alpine than he already has, the pair colliding after turn 1, with Esteban having to retire from the race given the damage to his car was so severe. However, if there is such a thing as karma, well, it showed itself in full force, as a few laps later, Piastri was having to come into the pits, retiring from the race just like Esteban. Back to the front, and in his Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton wasn't hanging around, making quick work of the other Ferrari using DRS to pass Leclerc, leaving just Norris a few seconds up the road. In behind, and given the magnetism between Verstappen and Hamilton, well, Max was making sure he was back behind the Brit. going down the inside of Leclerc with Charles electing to head off to Narnia, but Max keeping 3rd place. With things levelling out a little at the front, there was time to turn our attention to Logan Sargent at the back, as he was actually doing something good for a change, passing Magnussen on the back straight with the aid of DRS. Back to the front though, and with Verstappen not happy sitting in 3rd, the team called him in for a stop, with Norris then coming in the next lap round along with Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez, with Hamilton stopping a few laps later but losing a big chunk of time to come out way behind Verstappen. Up ahead though, and with Max on new mediums, he was chasing down Lando Norris who was on the hards, with Verstappen making the dive down the inside at the end of the back straight to take the lead of the race, with Norris getting the switchback and edging ahead, but with Max on the inside he held on. But with that overtake coming on lap 28 of 56, it meant something quite incredible had happened. We had gone an entire half-race distance without Max Verstappen leading. And so, with Max now leading the race with clear air ahead of him, it was time for some classic Dutch rage, with Verstappen over team radio deciding to absolutely lose it over how useless his brakes were. Brakes that I'm sure the rest of the grid would kill for. Fast forward a few laps, and with Norris's tyres done, he came in for a final stint on hard tyres, with Verstappen in the next lap round, also on the hards, with Hamilton just left to pit on mediums. So, with Verstappen and Norris both on fresh tyres, the pair were passing Leclerc, who was still yet to stop. Ferrari apparently keeping him out in search of some non-existent race pace, with Hamilton also getting the overtake on Charles Leclerc just a couple of laps later, with Leclerc moving backwards faster than Verstappen is usually moving forwards. Next on Hamilton's radar though, it was Lando Norris, with the veteran in DRS range down into turn 1, with Lando defending at the last minute, forcing Lewis to the outside but using the switchback to get the better exit in 2nd place, with Verstappen 5 seconds up the road but with his brake issues giving the Mercedes a half chance. Sadly for Lewis, time ran out with the gap down to 2 seconds as they crossed the line, win number I've lost count now on the season for Max. Anyway, that's all for now, thank you very much for watching, I hope you have enjoyed. If you have, do make sure to give the video a thumbs up and get yourself subscribed to the channel, but until next time, take care.